acid is a potent psychedelic that, if taken in high doses, a person will strongly manifest visual and auditory hallucinations. This is coupled with dilated pupils, elevated heart rate, and a strange phenomenon called ego dissolution. This is when your own person, your sense of self, turns into nothing, disintegrates. You are no longer a human. You're no longer yourself, and what's left is the LSD experience. What's left is the trip. This video will cover one story in particular, a haunting experience about a man whose perception was radically altered by this substance. The story that I'm about to tell you, and one similar like it, can all be found on one website, Erowid.org, a place where trip reports are shared, both good and bad. And if after this video you are interested in reading more stories like this, the link to Erowid.org can be found in the description box down below. Our first story is from Hiab X. About 10 years ago, I bought my third tab from a guy in my hometown in Norwich, UK. It was a strawberry tab, and I was told that it had been double dipped. The guy had a reputation of selling good acid, so I happily gave him my cash. My being in Norwich was just a social visit over a couple of days, and catching up with friends. On the last day there, I decided to drop a tab and use my friend's home as a trip HQ. He knew what I was up to. He had gone to work and left me his keys to make myself comfortable. I took this single LSD tab in the late morning in a positive state of mind with no worries or anxieties. I began to come up on the acid towards lunchtime. It was the first time and the last time I'd ever trip alone. Outside, it was a glorious sunny day, but I was happy enough in my temporary sanctuary to not really think about going outside. After a while, the LSD rush started blazing up my spine and racing through my guts. I felt a little uneasy, but I had enough in mind to allow myself to just go with it and just wait until the rush plateaued. After a while, it calmed down. I decided to sit upstairs in the house and listen to some music on the radio in the sunlit bedroom. I was having a wonderful time watching floral Escher-type patterns breaking over my skin. I enjoyed looking in the mirror, looking at my grinning face, and this distinct map contour patterns gently washing over my flesh. It really seemed like a great start. Well, I vaguely recalled deciding to go downstairs again for some reason, and the next thing I recall was awakening on the floor of the dining room alone. The first thing I noticed was that there were blowflies buzzing around a bowl of cat food on the kitchen floor, which was in view. I remember feeling perplexed as to why both flies had two bright neon after images in red and blue. I sat up and tried to figure out why I was on the floor in the first place. Now, it's worth pointing out before I take you down this helter-skelter that somehow, because of my blackout, I had completely forgotten that I'd taken anything at all. Prior to tripping, though, I wrote myself a note of reassurance in case things got too weird. So, sitting up on the floor still, I found my note and tried to read it. Alas, because I was on acid, the words made no sense to me. Instead, they morphed like alien glyphs and danced around the piece of paper. It was then my last little link of sanity crumbled, and I heard my voice utter the terrifying words, "I've gone mad." I had a feeling that I had to be somewhere else, which then got heightened by the digital watch I was wearing suddenly beeping a time alarm at me, but I had no idea why or what it meant, so I left my sanctuary, and I later found out that I left the back door wide open, thus making the house entirely a burglar's free-for-all. I remember waking up almost on autopilot on a busy street heading towards town. I saw one of my old teachers who saw me, but the only thing I did was force a grin and keep on walking. And I did indeed walk. Not so much as a conscious effort or with any sense of intent. I felt utterly out of control. I collided with someone carrying their shopping, vaguely heard them cuss at me as I continued my stride. I turned down a passageway between two houses and strolled through the back door of a house I'd once lived in, then past the new inhabitant and out the front door. I walked into the city center from there. I still don't know how I survived crossing roads, but I did. I strolled to the city cafe. My friend's son was working. He saw me and said hello, but in my acid-addled state of autopilot, I just walked past him into the main cafe and sat down. Then I stood up and walked out of the cafe without uttering a word. Other than being completely out of lunch on LSD, at that time on the trip, I don't recall hallucinating. Instead, I felt like a puppet on a string guided by some subconscious walking mechanism, which had its own
a low-income American on food stamps or Medicaid? Oh, you are eligible for a free
on where and there isn't any cognitive thinking that my actions. After the brief cafe episode, the situation just went from bad to worse. Somehow I navigated myself through Norwich and then began to head in the city's Central Park. As a child, I'd always felt a sense of friendliness and comfort there, but now in my fried state of mind, the familiar comfort of this park shifted to its polar opposite. It's now hallucinating on top of everything else. People in the park around my had begun to distort heads and faces beyond any form of human recognition. If you could imagine for a moment being surrounded by people in a busy park, their heads had been removed and replaced by bugs and octopus, you might begin to accurately picture the scene confronting me in this park. Everyone had tentacles smothering and dangling down their necks like fleshy snakes. Even the women and children were from this disfiguration. The octopus heads were white in appearance, and each seemed to have baleful, staring eyes. Ears should have been. Even in my state of autopilot, I felt sheer terror at this alien swarm of people around me. My obviously decided to take maneuvers because I then found myself out, having crossed yet another main road and heading towards a Mori apartment block. Recall that I got inside somehow and wandered in circles to the floors of the apartment block. It seemed stuck of wanting to get out, around a circle of short corridors and arriving at a cupboard. I opened the door expecting to find an confronted by the end of cleaning products and brooms. I would several times like that desperate around in circles around the kitchen and lied with the same window and again and again. I don't remember how I the loop, but I did. Something that happened of walking around side streets in back garden via an alleyway, and I recall a middle-aged woman looking afraid of me because in her yard, seeing her house closing the door behind her. Left the yard, and I fit between two garages. The gap was tight. Perhaps I tried to go through it, and my mind being trapped inside an ever spiral that endlessly marched along. As the spiral tightened, my body would crush. To continue down the spiral, I would surely crush to my final atom. This realization broke me, and then I realized that I was next to another in Norwich, in front of someone's garden. While looking at the front of this house, the inside of me felt like plant matter. I tried to scream, my tongue shot out a mix of and thorny rose stem. This was utterly hopeless, and it's getting and worse with each eternal minute. The other side of the main road was a dental repair shop. It was a discreet-looking place, and as much as part of that were above it. I walked into this workshop to the surprise of the men who were working there. He said, "Hey, where do you think you're going?" But I was too far gone. My way out again, still under the guidance of momentum and hitting this autopilot. The street began the final phase of my terrifying trip. To indulge me and go with the flow and abstract together. First off, Fleming, I walked this side road onto the pavement and then plummeted a good 7 into someone's basement flat. There had probably been a flight of down to this concrete pit. Didn't see them, and I known what to do with them if I had. I guess I clambered up the street level and limped my way up to this street with a bit of a cul-de-sac. Part of my subconscious memory must have recalled my girlfriend had lived there, and myself walking up the front door, which was one of those aluminum framed types. All my reflections were looking somewhat like this bacon painting, a mixture of anguished flesh and black oils dripping like blood in my body, falling an internal like a fleshy sack of bricks. As I fell forever, I would crash through the intermittent of glass that would shatter, tear me in never descent, with the sound of glass, the wavering crescendo of the word mad, repeating in waves. Mad, 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 over and over as I ripped into darkness with splinters ass falling beside me. These visuals and inclusions brought me to my knees. I was now a 7-year-old child on the pavement. His friend's parents feeling concerned, asking what happened. He hit his head.
Wait, hold on. Before you keep scrolling, let me tell you this brand new streaming app called Poke. You can go live 24/7 and connect with people in your new
says, calling someone says, during all of this, a disc-shaped hole above me with someone's arm down to try and pull me up into safety. I tried to reach up to the grasping hand, but I couldn't. Then the hole disappeared. After a moment, I was along the street again, at the bottom of the track. My gaze looked at the sky, and the sky's gaze fell upon me. Each cloud was now a type of amoeba type, covered in which pulsated in color like the skin of a cuttlefish. Each giant amoeba had a giant blue human-looking eye. I could hear voices me, telling me I was stupid, telling me how sick I was for looking for others, telling me I had plastic conscience. The amoebas singing a never song which was something else. I am an appeal, and if you ever know what I feel, I know that I felt like this before, and I always knew what I'm timely for. Repeated 1,000 times. I existence giant clock face, billion dots between second. The dot walking forward in a advance like the second hand, and in that moment it was the equivalent of lifetime. My internal dialogue was running the entire time. Described that living was part of this eternal change, and that the clock was measuring it all. Then the model laughing at my dismay. In reality, I was conscious enough to recognize that I'd been stuck in children's play base of the cul-de-sac. It's worth to do a little bit about the geographic area I was. Adjacent to the cul-de-sac, a small path that leads about 4 flights of stone steps down to the street below. The street is called Park Lane, and through the gap at the back of the children's area, there's a steep, overgrown embankment. It leads down to a travel parking area at the rear of the Park Lane. Guess which route I... In reality, the gap of the fence is the dangerous drop below, and then tumbled down the embankment to the Flint parking area. I was crawling on hands and knees by a piece of flint had torn the palm, making it look like a stick wound, which was pretty appropriate following delusion. Once I looked at the palm, the entire parking lot looked like a sea of holes. After from the ground, I noticed that I'm in a void with an infinity of black dots. I could hear sirens and the sounds of... I looked down again at dots, and I noticed a which had a pile of bloody organs spread across, staining the wood in crimson. The guts were smothered in wasps, the ruined flesh, venomous pustule. It was an image of impossible, and then the monologue booming over the sirens and groaning over the wasps. This is Christ. He is still suffering for your, still paying the price. More within a fleeting moment of reality, I just chose to clean. I wanted to leave, collapsed in the gutter on the other side. My jacket was gone. I noticed I was covered in gray. At that very moment, a wasp had landed on my head and was making a for itself of my cuts. I tried to brush it away, and as I did, I managed to get it off of me. I noticed there was a woman pushing him and looking at her, and for a moment looking at her gave me a sense of sanity. The moment she was outside of me, I was thrown right to LSD hell. My body was green flesh, punctured by cactus-like thorns that had grown within and broken my way out. No arms and legs. I was more like a tendrils. My form was the pain and nothing more, and a brief police car pulling up me and someone getting out. I was in pain in a sea of holes. There were each one passage leading identical warming bloods. The monologue told me there was only one hole which led me away from here, and in one blink, I was in a hospital, lying on a padded vinyl mattress, standing around me. I noticed I was shaped again. Very moment, the doors swung open, reveal a idyllic bright scene. Green hilly features, bathed in glorious sunlight, and a looking oak tree in the foreground. If I could crawl through those, I would be safe, full safe, but I couldn't move. The door swung shut again, and now I could see a hot corridor instead of fields. Someone was passed on a stretcher, and in that I knew that my salvation was. I was thrust back into a sea of holes. It seems that my gaze and action would erase the black dots in their masses. For the first time in this
Get paid up to $2 with direct deposit. Install the Chime and get started.
Things. 1. There are million beauties in this world. 2. 9.99% of them you will never meet in your life. 3. Can meet and chat with lots of them on Good Alive.
Sure, YouTube Premium the trial on that one.
felt a sense of hope. I wiped swaths of dots by sweeps in the void around me. What have you taken? I was gaining by the minute, stripping the black, removing these taunting exits. What have you taken? Was it accident? Surrounded by self-created void of comfort, I gazed at the bunch of black dots, and I knew peace from hell was held by these remaining. He's out of it. I gazed at two black. These two now had a bridge to a scene in a dot puzzle, and my voice returned as I stared at each dot. I heard my voice yelling, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Then the two dots looked like my own hands with cuffs around them. The black line had become a visible chain. It had faded to become a hospital room. I backed on my back on a hospital with my arms taped behind me. I was using my legs at my wrists, raised with the pressure of police handcuffs. And then, get these fucking handcuffs off me! Get them off! In the room with me were a male and police officer. He had obviously been the who had lifted me from the gutter and taken me to the hospital. The male officer obliged my demand of the cuffs, and the police officer asked me stuff, name, and if I knew where I was. But the best thing I could hear was a brief groan. They both looked a bit frustrated and left me in the room, hospital bed alone. I was rapidly regaining my sense of self and reality. I recalled that I indeed dropped sometime earlier. My hospital surroundings and the cuts and bruises I had information to me that what done, it had seriously fired big time. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, heard a number of items I had recalled having on my person prior to all of this. I found my pumps in the bedside cabinet. Then I took the first deliberate steps across the room. The bizarre this entire episode had a twist installed. I recall walking to the door of my bedroom and opening it. A few feet were the two police officers each other having an conversation about what to do about me. They were so engrossed in their discussion that neither noticed as I came to the room and began on the hospital corridor. There was a window that stood from floor to ceiling, the type that pitted central vertical access. So judging fit through the gap, through it. There's little left to tell of this story except my walk from the train station. Quite distressing. I was in a lot of pain, had stitches on my elbow and hand. My right forearm had swollen up purple, making Popeye's right hook. I was still fascinating, but very how I nearly died, and how I had a lot of explaining to do when I got home with my girlfriend. There were no repercussions for giving the police. I had caught a train to a village in Suffolk, which was at the Norfolk Police's jurisdiction. However, they had contacted my father in Norfolk, so quite a bit of explaining to do. In retrospect, the worst day of my entire life. It was the closest I can imagine to full-blown psychosis. I think it was a miracle that I didn't someone's car bonnet, or do I believe the monologues and symbols of I'm not entirely sure I do. I now understand the intense first-level hallucination responsible for dragging the mind into fear and possible scenarios. I kind of feel that I would have had a very bleak for life in reality if for a moment that anything on that trip was true. Some other trips which were curious and the polar of that day. I tend to agree with Huxley that heaven and hell are both valid states of consciousness. It all depends on where the person is at and how we navigate through the state which determines the destination we arrive at. If anything puzzles me about that day, it would have to be the blackout I experienced early in the trip. I suspect if I had not lost consciousness, I probably would have not forgotten that I took and therefore wouldn't put myself into an eternal hell fractal. This trip report was October 5th, 2003, and it functions as a cautionary tale why you shouldn't experiment with psychedelics. But to those who have tried psychedelics, I want you to share your thoughts about this in the comments down below. And even if you've never tried psychedelics, I want to know what your thoughts are on this bad trip. I hope you found this video interesting. Go ahead and subscribe and leave a like. Let's grow the Hours community together and make it something special. And I hope to see you guys in the next video.
Get 6,890 from this government program. If you don't